Normally I say hello, hello, hello. But today I'm thinking of starting the show with well. Welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me as always is Phil McKenzie. Is Phil McKenzie?
Oh, you were saying that's how you're going to start the show. And you'd actually started the show. Oh, no, I get it.
Yes, we're doing Heavy Hands. This is news to you at home and news to one half of the people recording the show. Phil, we did it again, old buddy. We did it again.
What you mean, almost called the upset?
Yeah, except I won't even give myself that much credit. I did not almost call the upset. Such was my certainty, my certainty completely unfounded in facts and entirely in vibes, that all the things I saw wrong with Adesanya, all the things I saw specifically that Sean Strickland might do to trouble him, that all of these could essentially just be overridden by the fact that Israel Adesanya is better than Sean Strickland.
Yeah, I think that was a fair assumption.
Yeah. So did everyone else, you know? No, I don't think anybody. Surely there's some people out there. I know, that friend of the show, Schwan Humes, was also out there talking about the same things that he thought made this a potentially very competitive booking. But, I don't think anybody picked Sean Strickland. Why the hell would you pick Sean Strickland? Turns out, all those little things we identified, and I will pat myself on the back for, I guess, coincidentally choosing this very specific aspect of Adesanya's game to write an article about last week. I'm going to plug it multiple times because it became suddenly extremely relevant as soon as this fight was done. It turned out that all those little things actually made Sean Strickland the perfect foil to Israel Adesanya. I would call him aggressive Jan Blachowicz.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jan himself recognized the similarity because he tweeted the moment this fight was over. Did you see that?
Oh, I didn't actually. What did he say?
He said something along the lines of, I guess if it looks stupid but it works, it isn't stupid. Wink. So, I don't know. He saw some similarity there between he and Strickland both having this super active, handsy defense, and both of them doing a really good job defensively, and how that just basically completely neutered Israel Adesanya, with the difference being why that fight felt competitive, but clearly Jan's, and this one felt clearly Strickland's and not remotely competitive. The difference being that Sean Strickland spent the whole time coming forward. But otherwise, he did all the same shit, and it allowed him to completely neutralize Israel Adesanya. That I would never have seen coming in a million years, even though in hindsight, it now appears it's like a good ending to a book. It's like, wow, I never saw that coming, but looking back, this is the only way it could have gone.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as someone who didn't want Sean Strickland to win this fight, it was oddly satisfying to watch.
Yes.
Like, on the one hand, I was just like, I was watching it like, kill him, Izzy. But also, I was just sitting there thinking, like, yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
You know, it's so rare that you sort of see flaws get identified in, like, a championship level fighter. And then you just see them just get absolutely, like,
yeah,
pulled wide open.
Yeah.
That, you know, it just felt like bizarrely, like, yeah, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, on the one hand, this is one of the most impressive, like, championship performances.
Oh my God.
Like, ever in many ways.
Yeah, everyone was, comparing it to Holm Rousey because both took place in Australia and both were similar upsets in terms of the odds. I'm not knocking that, but to me, what this made me think of was RDA Pettis.
Yeah. I was thinking of RDA Pettis, but there's never really been anything like this before. Like, Adesanya was someone who went into the UFC and jumped directly to basically the championship caliber.
Mm-hmm.
And Strickland has had a steady journey from sort of journeyman to gatekeeper.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen, and the fact that it was just broadly a dismantling.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. RDA, in retrospect, you're like, yeah, you fought a ton of people that were, he'd only really lost to either extremely good people or people early in his career and so on and so forth. Strickland has had, quite a lot of struggles with people who aren't really that good. There was no reason to assume that he could fight at this level. It's one of the most, and everything about the way that the fight played out is, I think, sort of attuned to make Strickland's win, really undeniable. You could be like, maybe Israel Adesanya didn't take him seriously. And then you could be like, well, the obvious answer to that is, surely he must have, after he almost got wiped out in round one.
Yeah. If he didn't take him seriously, then what's to explain him not starting to take him seriously, very quickly into the fight? When he was like, oh, this guy, I can't get him the fuck off of me.
Yeah. And, then you can take that narrative and run with it. You can be like, well, maybe Adesanya was just hurt from the knockdown. He won the second round. Yeah. That's the only round he won.
Yep.
It was everything about it. It was just an absolute shutout of someone who has never really been on that level against someone who undeniably is one of the 3 greatest middleweights we've ever seen.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, it is like RDA Pettis in that suddenly faults in the defending champion style are just, as you said, exposed and just as quickly just torn open, with no chance of recovery. They just get shoved out of the fight almost immediately. But RDA is like a beast, I don't think we're going to look back at the final days of Sean Strickland's career, which will probably be just as long as RDA's. They are both young veteran kind of fighters. I don't think we'll be looking back and saying, man, that Sean Strickland was a hell of an athlete. God, he was strong. Or any of these things that RDA at lightweight obviously has. He's a tank. This was simply Sean Strickland with what is basically just his normal game, proving to be a complete stylistic foil. And I don't want to take any credit away from him because the very small adjustments, the things he clearly prepared specifically for this fight, were perfect. Mm-hmm. They were the only things he needed to add to what is otherwise just again, I'm going to be talking about this like I'm certain of it, as if I predicted it. But that is how the fight played out. Once you see it, oh, of course, that's how this fight goes. That's the kind of fight it was. He just has, I don't know. I'm still in shock. I'm still in shock. That Israel Adesanya, except with extreme discomfort, just simply could not get his game to work against Sean Strickland. None of the things he likes to do work against this opponent.
Yeah.
And he got broken. I mean, he broke Israel Adesanya by the end of this fight.
That was for me, that is the most concerning.
Yeah.
For Israel and one of the reasons why he absolutely 100% shouldn't get an immediate rematch.
No, he should not. It wouldn't be good for him.
He needs to take some time off. He's had an incredibly heavy schedule of fights.
Yes.
Which he's now at risk of being 4-4 in his last 8 if he loses his next fight. But yeah, it was the fact that in that last round, when he was very, very clearly down 3-1.
Yep.
He still couldn't make himself pull the trigger.
He couldn't go for it.
absolutely concerning is that he wanted it to be over more than he wanted to win.
Yep.
And you just can't do that. Like, you just can't have that mentality. It's dangerous.
Yep.
And yeah, I think he needs to go back, take some time, and figure things out.
For sure. Yeah, Eugene Behrman seems to have been banging the drum of the rematch way harder than Izzy himself.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that he doesn't get pressured into doing it. I mean, in all likelihood, Izzy will not need much convincing, if any, to decide that he wants it back right away. But, you know, I get some of what Eugene is saying, that there are like relatively small adjustments to make here that could make this a winning fight for Izzy, no question. You know, Sean Strickland's not that good. He doesn't have that well-rounded a game, but he just fucking dismantled you. Like, absolutely mentally dismantled you, took away all of your effective tools, and made your life miserable and made you quit in front of everyone watching this fight live. Like, don't rush back into a matchup like that. Also, he doesn't deserve it. Sorry, he was...
As said, he's 4-3 over his last 7.
Yeah. And he got crushed. I mean, you know, like, I'm cool with series more than a lot of other annoyingly hardcore fans. I think, you know, I like seeing sort of arcs play out between two fighters, but you know, he got pasted. He just got completely wiped out in this fight. What is the argument? He lost his title and then won it back. And then in his first defense returning from that, he just gets crushed. Like, both for his sake and for the division, he should not get an immediate rematch.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, tell me about the fight. I mean, what was your perspective on how it played out?
Yeah, I mean, both of us were like, had exactly the same sort of feelings on this. I'm glad, like, neither of us were actually dismissive of Sean Strickland.
Yeah.
We were like, I'm sure there's going to be like very competitive moments in this fight, because it's hard to see how they couldn't be there.
Yeah.
Unless he gets wiped out. You know, the double jabs, the pushing Izzy back, the tendency to defend, like, using head movement and trunk movement, which you can't do against non-committal jabs, because you're moving your whole body, your whole upper body, and the other person is moving like their hand and their elbow.
It's Sean Strickland, so he's literally just moving his arm. This isn't the guy who steps in super deep and commits to his jab. Like, he has the jabbiest jab in the division. It is just a poke.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the big story of this one that made it much worse than I thought it could be. I mean, firstly, obviously, is you know, we had some discussion of, like, you know, has Izzy learned to come forward since the Pereira fight more?
Yeah.
And like I very much doubt it, and 100% that was
I was more optimistic on that front. I really hoped that he took that as a broader lesson, but he did not.
No, yeah. From the beginning, he was giving Sean the best fight he could hope for. So yeah, from a directional perspective, it was like exactly the kind of thing that would allow Strickland to do his best work.
Yep.
I think the thing which surprised me the most was the kicking game, which is partially a misunderstanding of like how good Strickland could be defensively, but also like a misunderstanding of of how I think calcified Izzy has become into a certain type of fighter.
Yeah.
Because I said, like, one of the things about Strickland's stance is that it makes him harder to low kick than a lot of people, because he is not, you know, his front leg is not an available target a lot of the time, because he's standing relatively square.
Mm-hmm. Easy for him to open up with either leg and check, which he did. He was checking with both legs from that almost squared position. Yes.
But I said that the main thing that was that makes him vulnerable to low kicks is when he steps in. It's when he covers the final bit of distance. It's that you can counter low kick him. And what I should have thought is, does Israel Adesanya counter low kick people?
Yeah, no.
Does he kick people on the retreat as they are pulling back from their punches? Or does he kick them simultaneously? As you know, does he kick them as like not necessarily. You wouldn't have a same time counter as a punch, but does he counter jabs with low kicks?
Yeah,
and
you could do a same time.
Both of these things is no, because he is a pot shotter with his kicks.
Yeah, you could do a same time counter with a kick. I don't think that's an unusable term.
Yeah.
A lot of Dutch kickboxers do that move. You pull your head off line, and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And no, yeah, you're right. He moves backwards and evades, and then he kicks. And for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about here, most opponents do not have the wherewithal to stay on him consistently enough to prevent those moments when he gets one of those kicks off.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, I got an overpowering feeling that Izzy's goose was cooked very early into the first round. I was immediately joking about it on Twitter. I said, Sean Strickland has checked the first 3 low kicks. Izzy's in trouble. And I was kind of joking, and I kind of wasn't.
Because you're still thinking, at some point, this nuclear puncher is simply going to take Sean Strickland's head off.
Yeah. He's just going to hit him with things that are way more powerful than anything Sean Strickland himself can muster. And yeah, I mean, of course, I'm immediately, how many times have I harped on about the kicking defense being like the key element to Izzy's loss to Jan Blachowicz? That he just could not rack up free damage the way he does. Like something like the fight with Paulo Costa, we said at the time, that was not Izzy being a masterful ring general. That was Paulo Costa having the worst game plan in history. And literally just standing at long range and not trying to threaten with any punches or anything. That's why Izzy looked so smooth and so crushingly dominant in that fight. But if you can push him back so that he has to really pick his spots to get the kicks off, and then you can check the kicks, what is his game? And it turns out it is, and this is what I wrote my article about, it is a very uncontrolled, purely reactive counterpunching game. And I compared Izzy not flatteringly to his teammate, to Volkanovski, who I think is like the king of distance control. By which I don't just mean managing the distance, which he does really well, but literally controlling an opponent as if you are pinning them to the ground, but in free movement, in open space, at distance. Being able to keep that sort of vice grip on, no, you don't get an angle on me, you don't get close to me unless I want you to, and every time I move, you have to worry about what I'm doing. Volkanovski, in that sense, is a masterful positional fighter, and it mostly comes down to the great consistency with which he does the thing we were praising Sean O'Malley for a couple weeks ago. That when he is being evasive, he takes this as a zero-sum proposition. When he's being evasive, he is also being threatening. You always have to worry about running onto the end of his jab. Even when he's not throwing it, it's there. And as an opponent, either he makes you feel it, or if you're a savvy, defensively aware opponent, which Sean Strickland is, you can feel the threat of the jab. You can feel that he's lined up and that you don't have a clear line of sight on him and that you have to move, create some angle to even get to him. And the process of doing that, that jab is going to be threatening you. And what I wrote about is the fact that Izzy does not have this. His evasive movements are purely evasive. And he puts himself out of stance. He, literally, first thing he does is he takes his jab offline. So now there is nothing stopping the opponent from continuing to pressure him. And this works really well against the likes of a Marvin Vettori. And I remember rewatching their second fight and being more impressed with Izzy's performance than I was the first time. Aside from the couple of takedowns Vettori gets, it's a really, really one-sided fight. But it's because Vettori, as powerless as Sean Strickland, and that is still the case. I know he knocked him down in the first round, but he's still not a huge puncher. But being as low powered as Sean Strickland, but way more rote and, more importantly, way more willing to extend his combinations, as like Robert Whittaker did, to incredibly suicidal effects. And this is how Izzy's game works off the back foot, is that he puts himself in these weird positions, but he's very calm and he has fantastic timing, and he will wait for you to pull the trigger, chasing his head, which appears to be so wide open. And because he waits for those moments to to build the bridge to his like next evasive position, he can counter the fuck out of you. He gets you chasing the target. And what happens if the opponent takes all that initiative, that you have given him, that you're not threatening him with the jab, you're making big, inefficient reactions to every threat that comes at you, and then deliberately putting yourself in vulnerable positions? What happens if he just jabs? And this is why we thought it would be surprisingly competitive. It turns out it just completely destroys Izzy's entire game. If he can't get the low kicks off, and that is the effect being accomplished against the other aspect of his back foot game, and he is allowing the opponent to come forward. This is why I say it feels predictable in retrospect. Of course he loses that fight. He doesn't have the right tools to deal with it.
It was simply, and Strickland is never going to get tired of racking up jabs.
Of course not, yeah.
He's never going to get discouraged. He's never going to feel, I think, a lot of the nature of like, there's a lot of times when we in like MMA history and so on, people looked at fights and they're like, why does someone will be given like a low risk attritional weapon and they'll just start winning with it, and then they'll like mysteriously just go away from it, and you find something, why don't they just stick with it? Like I think I've heard like Jack Slack talking about this, about like Frankie Edgar's low kicks against Jose Aldo. Mm-hmm. Is that he's just landing a bunch of slapping low kicks, just like, why don't you just do that? You're winning. Like,
sure. Just
don't try and do anything else. And it kind of is, you find yourself thinking, maybe he was right. Maybe that could have happened. But the thing is that like most fighters are not psychologically capable of doing that. That is an extremely stressful thing to do.
Yeah.
To just, offer your opponent the same sort of probabilistic gamble almost every single time, to just never try and get them out of there, never think at this point they're going to go after me, and to never like sell out and think now is the time to just rip their head off. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do, but again, that is Sean Strickland to a T. Is that that's just what he does. I think it's what he spends all his time doing.
Yeah, is simply
he just spars with people and then he walks them down and then just jabs them a whole bunch. Like, it's just what he does for fun. It's, Chris Curtis, I think I saw, he was talking, he was saying that, he thinks Sean Strickland is, jacked up his foot a bit in this fight. He's probably still just going to be back to sparring tomorrow, because otherwise he wouldn't know what else to do with himself.
Yeah.
No, he's just going to do that all day forever. And he just did.
Yeah.
Eventually, Adesanya, again, I can't stress again how bad this looks, and how much Beman and his team should take a very, very close look at whether they want to let him back into competition anytime soon.
Yeah.
Is that at the end of it, Adesanya was just like, no, I just want it to be over. I don't even want to try and punch this guy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting bossed around the cage by Sean Strickland.
Yeah.
Just low risk jabs. I mean, it was a really non-violent fight.
I mean, Sean Strickland did open up at points. He really picked his spots. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, he dropped Izzy at the end of the first round with a beautiful straight right hand. He caught him with some nice body shots a couple times underneath Izzy's counters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they were sparing, and he just has, of course, he has the mental endurance to just stay there, very, very, very attentive on defense. And I do want to highlight this. I mean, people, I think, since the Pereira fight have convinced themselves that actually Sean Strickland's defense is bad. It's not. It's limited. There are ways of exploiting it, but this is true of every defense. Say, for example, Izzy's mode of defense, which we just saw get punched full of goddamn holes. There are ways of exploiting any kind of system of defense. The fact that Sean Strickland is so reliant on, first of all, just being at the right distance, and then just picking things off with his hands. Yeah, Pereira got through with a big one, but it was a nightmare for Izzy to deal with here. He said to his corner, after the second or third round, he said, I can't find my jab. Which is a product of Strickland's defense. As we pointed out, Strickland catches jabs, which is actually, I would argue, if you're going to do anything, any defensive measure against a jab, that is in fact the best way to deal with the jab.
I mean, yeah, and this is why Pereira was a particularly challenging matchup for him, because Strickland started reaching for the jab and then ended up getting herded into the left hook.
Yeah.
That is one of the ways in which you deal with hand trap defenses. But again, you look back at it, and in retrospect, you're like, is Adesanya a big jab left hook guy?
Well,
his left hook counter is mostly that big leaning swing.
Which got punished by the right hand at the end of round one. That was the shot that he got knocked down while trying to throw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is not as smooth or natural as Pereira's left hook, and
it's just not part of his offensive arsenal.
No.
It's a defensive tool.
Yeah, and I think that's an aspect that Strickland has very much in common with Jan Blachowicz. And there's a fight where somebody is more or less constantly in range. Again, the main difference being the direction of the fight, that Blachowicz was very rarely pressing forward at all. But there's one where, famously, Adesanya gets a billion reactions to his feints and everything. He gets Blachowicz reaching for everything. In Joe Rogan's words, Blachowicz was eating a ton of feints in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just not the kind of opening Adesanya is particularly good at exploiting. He wants you to do the big stupid swing. Otherwise, he is going to peck at you with his jabs and his low kicks. And if you have a very active catching, parrying defense, most of the jabs just aren't going to get through. Because that's not what his feinting game is designed to do. It's not what he's comfortable doing. Sean Strickland will just do that all day. He doesn't even get markedly tired in fights that are much faster paced than this. He is a well-conditioned fighter, and he is also, because I assume you're right, that the vast majority of this man's training is sparring. Because of that, he responds to getting tired really, really well. It doesn't really change the way his game operates. Something that
he simply just has an extremely energy efficient style where he just walks around after people. And,
but he was getting tired.
He doesn't even have to hold a stance really most of the time.
Yeah, he just walks. I mean, he got tired beating Magomedov's ass. But it doesn't. This is something that like Emmanuel Stewart always harped on about when there was like a big experience or age difference. I know he mentioned it in Tony versus Jirov. He mentioned it in Bernard Hopkins versus Kelly Pavlik. That the thing you note about these really experienced fighters is that they have a bunch of stuff that comes automatically well after they get tired.
Yeah.
So the game just continues functioning sort of by inertia. It just keeps working because it's all muscle memory. That's the effect Sean Strickland has when he does actually get tired. This pace was never going to make him tired, not mentally or physically. Can we talk about that second round?
Yeah.
Because Izzy won it. He won it quite clearly.
Yeah. How much of this is Strickland taking it off versus Adesanya going out there and winning it?
I think it was mostly Adesanya going out there and winning it, if I'm honest.
I agree.
And I think that the impression of Strickland taking it off is yet another downside of his mode of defense, which is
I don't think Strickland does. I don't think Strickland actually takes rounds off. I think he's always exactly the same person.
I think you're 100% right. What happens if you, as a guy who needs your hands to pick off all the punches coming at you, faces a guy who throws lots and lots and lots of punches at you? You can't punch it back because you need your hands to stop from getting hit. And that's basically what it was. Like, it was a very crude adjustment from Izzy, really, but he just did a lot more. He came forward more, and he threw a lot more. He put combinations together, and he just won the round. And I think that's the particularly alarming thing that is maybe more about, I don't know, where Izzy's at, whatever, is that he could not keep that going. Or bring it out again after that round. He got mentally exhausted, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think a telling comparison for this is Strickland Cannonier. If you look at the directionality of that fight, Cannonier is pushing Strickland backwards almost the entire time.
Yeah, and Strickland doesn't win those fights.
I think when I looked back at this at Strickland Cannonier, I did actually find myself thinking it's actually a credit to Sean Strickland because Cannonier, he just went out there and just dusted Marvin Vettori, just brutalized him. It was obvious that Strickland is actually a fair bit better than Marvin Vettori, if people didn't realize that yet already.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, it was the fact that Cannonier, Strickland in his worst element still had a very, very competitive fight with Jared Cannonier.
Yeah.
But also that Jared Cannonier had the right idea. That it was get this guy moving backwards, get him moving out over his feet. That is, when he is moving backwards and he's leaving his foot behind and he's leaving his leg behind him, that is when you can low kick him.
Yeah.
Cannonier low kicked Strickland far more effectively than Adesanya did. But also, yeah, he was just kept him moving backwards the entire time because Strickland, I mentioned this, and again, this was one of those things that I didn't necessarily think would be true of Adesanya, but it really is because Strickland's game relies so much on that idea that other people hate being in the pocket for extended amounts of time.
Yeah.
And he just goes around it, and they just get driven backwards by, the power of magnetism. Once they're in that little circle around him.
Yeah.
They're just no, I don't like it.
And I mean, shit, that is how a lot of pressure works. A lot of times it's just the guy who's willing to take a step forward who gets the opponent to back up. It's oh, what are you so confident about? Why are you coming at me? You instinctively respond by reopening that distance when somebody just walks at you. And Strickland is comfortable just walking at somebody. 100%. He won't overextend, but he will take that first step and try to force you back like that.
Yeah, but he's not actually super committed to Cannonier was I'm going to be the aggressor in this fight. And he was.
Yeah, because if you threaten him, he's
pretty much the entire 5-round fight. Strickland, as I said, his consistency is incredibly high in terms of who he is. But, along with that comes that same kind of directional aimlessness.
Yeah.
Adesanya's back hit the fence so much because Adesanya made it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Strickland's incredibly consistent in who he is, and who he is a guy who pays attention to what threats are coming at him and creates as much space and devotes as much hand activity to stopping those threats as necessary to not get blown out, which is why he basically never gets blown out. But it's also why there are a number of fights to look at where, yeah, somebody walks him down and he just doesn't get going. And yeah, you're right. This is the thing I wrote about. his style when he gets into this back foot mode, it is like positionally sacrificial.
Yes.
He is putting himself in a position where all you have to do is walk forward. And if you do that with a threat that is either just very straightforward and efficient or merely implied, if you do anything that isn't taking a big lunging swing at his apparently open head, then he is going to be forced into another positionally sacrificial move. It only takes a short sequence of these big wide steps and bobbing and weaving movements for his ass to hit the fence. Because at the end of the day, until you commit to something that he can punish, there isn't much he's offering to threaten you when you want to walk him down.
Yeah. And the other side of like wedge tools that we talked about is that, don't just like open people up for big things, because that is as you said, it's the philosophical, that's the sort of philosophical, soul of Izzy's game, is that he expects people to build off things into bigger things. They just put you ahead.
Yeah.
Like the wedge just it just starts you winning. Like Strickland did this with mostly just low commitment jabs.
Yep.
Occasionally, as you said, he took some genuinely nice like counter punches when they were, and like when they got chest to chest, he was still able to punch with Izzy most of the time and still come out on top because Izzy was in horrendous positions. But yeah, just a combination of the jab and just like gently booting Izzy center mass every now and again. Yep.
Yeah, that front kick he ended with as like his the distance is widening tactic. Most people will do like throw a body kick or a low kick in there, but he chased Izzy out of the pocket with push kicks, and they were really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was constantly lifting his knee up to check, so
yep.
It wasn't like a huge danger of anything. He was at least disguising when he was going to do it.
Yep.
A lot. And yeah, it just meant that he was just piling up. Leads over the course of pretty much every round.
Yeah. Fundamentally, Sean Strickland does not have a game that allows him to maintain an initiative. But Izzy's game fundamentally gives the opponent initiative. Mm-hmm. And that, yeah, again, like I can't think of any better way to say it than like, as much as I did not see this coming, I certainly saw the elements of it, and when shown how those elements actually fit together, with the addition of, I mean, I guess you could argue he threw a lot of those push kicks. That's a strike Strickland likes already, though. That's not atypical for him. But really the super attentive leg kick defense, when you add in that, then those basic components feel like, yeah, of course, they just crush Israel Adesanya. He's Jan Blachowicz, but he's coming forward the whole time, so Izzy hates his life the entire time he's fighting Jan Blachowicz. It's just a much worse version of that exact matchup. Without even the need to try to wrestle. Nope. Yep. Unnecessary. You're just going to let me do what I want the whole time? Okay. What I want to do is poke you over and over and over again.
Because, I mean, Jan will occasionally, Blacko blitz or, like, sell out for something big, and, like, Sean Strickland just isn't that guy.
Yep. Yeah, most of his extended combinations were, in fact, him, like, recountering Izzy. And this is another reason why it worked so well when he did pick his spots, is that because Izzy was just letting him have the initiative, all of those extended sequences he allowed were coming at his behest. It was because Izzy had reacted to something he had done first. And that is just always a weaker position when you're essentially allowing your opponent to lead you around by the nose. You are fundamentally relying on them to screw up for you to be able to get in. And yeah. Brilliant.
You know what else this reminded me of?
What's that?
It's a little bit. Bisping Silva.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how Strickland and Bisping don't like each other that much.
Because they're the same guy.
They are the same guy, yeah.
Yeah, of course they don't like each other.
But like Bisping is the one who's sort of made a real life for himself, and I think Strickland is very scared of doing that for himself. So
who knows?
I think Bisping
maybe someday Sean Strickland will be happy with a family. I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, I don't hate. I don't hate Sean Strickland. I think he has a lot of likable things to him.
100%. He's self-aware. You admire his confidence. He has a sense of humor, both about himself and about the sport he participates in. That alone is enough to set him apart from your average MMA fighter. I like Strickland. He's also just sometimes just a heinous piece of shit, but he's an MMA fighter.
There you can definitely see there are two paths for Sean Strickland to go down.
So is Izzy with the combination.
That's why Bisping likes Strickland more than Strickland likes Bisping. Because Bisping kind of knows that Strickland could make something of himself and Strickland, I think, is sort of allergic to that. To the idea that he might be a lonely weird guy, really.
Maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in general, Silver Bisping was very much the kind of the guy who uses the huge puncher who uses the weird head movement, and then the guy who can push people out over their feet by just coming in behind lots of jabs and left hooks. The classic journeyman volume guy. Suddenly actually turns out to be a much better choice against the the big hitter than other big hitters were. Which, when you come down to it, you're like, oh yeah.
Of course. Right.
Of course.
Especially because that big hitter is just going to let the journeyman volume guy do all the journeyman volume stuff he wants to do. Going to be comfortable all night long. So yeah, I have no idea what to expect out of a Sean Strickland title reign. It appears that they are going to try to run this back.
Please no. At least Dricus Strickland will be funny as hell.
It really would. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what that looks like.
I mean, and I don't actually mean the run up to the fight. I don't care about any of that stuff. It would be dreadful.
Yeah.
But the actual fight itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Comedy gold, yeah.
Guaranteed comedy. A bunch of people were talking about, as soon as this happened, they were like, wow, Dricus would beat Adesanya. And I'm not saying that's impossible. Dricus clearly has, some qualities that we did not fully appreciate when we first saw him, because everything he does is ridiculous and bad. But he's clearly a very intuitive fighter. He's very attentive. He does make adjustments, and he is a beast physically. He hits really hard. He's really fucking strong. These are all qualities that matter. But I think what the lesson people took away from this is that Adesanya doesn't know how to deal with pressure, and that if you pressure him, you will just crush him. And that is clearly not the case, because he has carved up a bunch of people who have pressured him in the past. The problem here was that the guy who was pressuring him was just happy to keep pressuring him and didn't need to do that much with it to be satisfied. That he was just constantly on the edge of range, constantly threatening, and yet when he stepped in to do something, it was almost entirely just jabs or safe kicks. There was nothing for Izzy to bite on. So I'm not saying it's impossible.
Unless Dricus is smart enough to be able to completely retool his game.
Yeah.
Is the opposite.
Exactly.
How Dricus Duplessis fights.
Dricus doesn't need to get suckered into big overextended punches. It's built in. So
yes.
I want to push back on that and say that provided Izzy isn't shot, a potential matchup between him and Dricus, I wouldn't take this as evidence that he's doomed. It's not impossible that Dricus wins at all. Dricus is a good fighter for what he is, but he would give Izzy a lot of chances to clean his fucking clock.
I would pick Izzy by round one knockout. I've got to be honest.
I don't know how. I mean, I do need to see Izzy come back from this, because if he wasn't declining in some meaningful way before this, he might have a hard time recuperating. This wasn't like fighting Pereira, where it was stressful and not fun, but he can still, each time he loses, he can look back and be like, hey, I was doing good. There was something to cling on to. This was clearly a miserable experience in which he literally gave up. So That's going to take some recuperating from, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I find it. I can't think of another like prominent champion who really had. I mean, there is Rousey to some extent.
Rousey,
At least Rousey kind of went out just failing and dying. You know, at least she exploded.
Yeah, like, there's Rousey. The other example, which is much worse for Izzy, is Henan Barao.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like the Barao fights against TJ, he just got punched to death. Like,
yeah, he just didn't get slowly tortured and have his will broken.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen, fights like, people said this before, John Jones in his fourth and fifth rounds of pretty much any fight.
Yeah.
He's always fucking going for it, GSP probably loses on the cards to Hendricks, but he certainly didn't lose the fifth round.
Hell no. He went for it.
I cannot think of someone who was like,
and the only time
that clearly wasn't badly hurt, wasn't exhausted, and just kind of gave up in the last, in the fifth round of a fight. Like maybe Tyron Woodley. That's a terrible, terrible comparison.
It's Woodley.
Yeah.
Who is, I would describe Woodley's fighting style as, I don't know, chronic was the word that came to mind. Like, it's a condition,
Yeah. And, if you are Israel Adesanya, you should look at Tyron Woodley and see the fucking ghost of Christmas Future and turn away now. Like,
you just see an image of yourself. An image of yourself
knocked out by an influencer and having a raccoon savaging the general.
That's what I was going to bring up. You just see a ghostly apparition of yourself pretending to have your dick eaten by a raccoon and releasing a rap album that nobody likes.
Yeah. Because we've sort of been talking down Izzy a lot, but like, again, I don't think this is him. He's that guy. He is, know that he's incredibly mentally tough. Like, I think it's just got too much for him.
It was the particular aspects of this style matchup that
the style that he's driven himself into over time.
Yeah, that's
I think it just and the pressure of having all these title fights and all this kind of stuff. I think at some point, some part of him is just like, no, I don't want it, no more.
He has developed a defensive mindset, and he overcame that with the specific challenge of Pereira to an extent in their rematch. I thought he was clearly making an effort, and maybe if they were to run this back, he could do the same. But, I don't know. He tried it.
Being scared to come forward against Sean Strickland is as damning as anything that can happen to
and
you.
He tried it.
I really want to see Izzy take time off.
Me too. Yeah, 100%.
Like a year.
Yeah, and then don't fight Sean Strickland right away. But I think they're going to do it. I mean, Dana White's on board. Eugene Behrman's on board. I'm sure Izzy wants it back.
And maybe he could even win with a few adjustments.
Exactly. I don't think Behrman's wrong.
I don't think it's good for him.
Yeah. No, I don't think Behrman's wrong about that. I mean, I feel like just like he did in the second MMA fight with Pereira, he could come in knowing like, okay, I'm going to have to go into like dogfight mode. Like that's how I win this. I cannot let him build up any kind of lead or momentum. So I just have to, this is going to be one of those fights where I have to do a lot more. The funny thing is, if you do that against Strickland, it won't even be a dogfight. Because you're going to turn off his offense by just being aggressive. But, I mean, like, that would take a concerted, dedicated effort in his training camp, because we saw him try to do that on the fly in this fight. And he did not have the mental endurance to keep it up. He didn't like it. And as a champion, more and more, he does not like having that kind of active, aggressive fight where he is just constantly like grabbing the initiative and doing stuff with it. He hasn't done that shit since Brad Tavares. Even in the rematch with Pereira was a marked difference, but it wasn't as marked a difference as like Edwards Usman 3. Where suddenly Edwards just knew exactly what to do and he just wasn't getting pushed around at all. Pereira was still backing Izzy up, and he was still cornering himself, and he literally won the fight with his ass pressed up against the fence. So, I think he could make the adjustments. I think he could very easily win this matchup with a couple changes, but I just don't know that it's a good idea. And also maybe he can't. So it's too uncertain.
He has to learn, like, he has to ask himself whether he likes being aggressive.
Yeah.
Like, and he has to try and find his love for being aggressive again. And if he can't find it,
yeah,
he shouldn't fight Sean Strickland. That's just it.
Yep. All right. Well, that is more than enough on this fight. Although I could go on talking about it. What an amazing upset. The perfect storybook ending. Not in that it's like, ooh, Sean Strickland gets to marry the princess. But again, like, did I see it coming? No. Now that it's happened, I feel like I saw it coming. Wow, everything that happened here made perfect sense. What a great ending to the build-up to this fight it was. And
we are getting close to, I mentioned this at some point, the possibility of Strickland, Colby, and Sean O'Malley being champions all at the same time.
God.
And honestly, look out from the outset, I would have said Colby is by far the most likely of these three to actually win.
God. I guess, you know, I really hate Colby much more than either of the other two.
Yeah.
So if we could just keep
he seems
him out.
He seems like a genuinely bad person. Yes.
Yeah, he's a bad guy. No
one has a nice thing to say about him.
Yeah, Sean Strickland has admirable qualities. Sean O'Malley doesn't, but he's really just irritating. He's not. I don't think he's evil. He's just annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, Colby Covington is like future mall shooter. Like, this is a man who is deeply, deeply unhappy and lonely and cannot acknowledge that and has to project all that pain and suffering outward at all times. He's a troubled and troubling individual in the way that the other two are not. So let's just keep Colby out of the title picture. Leon's a cool, stoic, quiet man, easy to like. And I can take the Seans being champions. I could take that.
Yeah.
And we could take
There's a certain segment of the internet that would fucking jizz its pants over those three being champions at the same time.
Oh, yeah. I'm not unhappy to have Strickland as champ. I mean, I know there will be some people
this was a sensational performance.
It really was. And I like Strickland. Yeah. I have said this even as we've seen more of him, and everyone has been like, "Ugh." I liked Strickland.
You liked him even when he hadn't learned his terrible MMA personality.
Yeah, I liked him.
I liked Sean Strickland. People were like, who?
Who? Back when he fought Tom Breeze, I was like, ooh, this guy's game is like exactly the right kind of dysfunctional but functional for me. Mm-hmm. I have been a Sean Strickland fan for a long time. And even as we have learned more discomforting things about him, I still think I like his style. And I still think, as you said earlier, there are many admirable qualities that Sean Strickland possesses as well. He's a complicated man, and I can accept that. Mm-hmm. But let's keep Colby out of there. And let's take a break. When we come back, we have another title fight coming up next weekend on a fight night card, no less. Alexa Grosso versus Valentina Shevchenko 2. After that, we'll probably try to squeeze in a little discussion of the co-main event coming up next week. That's Kevin Holland versus the recently exposed Jack Della Maddalena. And we may also find room to talk about Manuel Kape versus Felipe dos Santos from this undercard alongside that. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show.
We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello and welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on now into the future. UFC Fight Night, a card which is sort of supposed to be themed around Mexican fighters, but there's only like 4 of them. Grosso versus Shevchenko 2. Decent card. Overall.
It was much better.
It was.
I think it's gone from being like genuinely like quite good to being fine.
Yes, as people will hear in the bonus episode that is going up today, meaning a day before you're hearing this main show, we did talk about the profound impact that fight cancellations seem to have on cards in the modern UFC. This one, no different. Even so, a fight night card, a short card, first of all, that's cool.
Hey.
You know, there's only like 10 fights on here. Maybe, yeah, there's 10 fights. Beautiful. With a title fight, an interesting title fight, nonetheless. And then enough highlights for me to be like, yeah, this is good. So we'll see how much of it holds up. All we're really going to be talking about in this segment, though, is the main event. The aforementioned Alexa Grosso, who is defending her title against the woman she took it from, the vile Valentina Shevchenko. And, yeah, I don't even really remember all that we said about that fight after it happened. I mean, this has been the last year or two, we have had a lot of title fight upsets, a sort of a changing of the guard kind of moment in the UFC. And this was certainly one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, for sure. Val was definitely one of the more sort of untouchably perceived champions.
Yep.
And yeah, I think the narrative after the fight for this one was an interesting one. I mean, especially like the narrative that came from Shevchenko herself, which is that like she was doing super well. Like, Grasso just capitalized on a single tactical moment, and it was a kind of anyone can just get caught kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which was really not how I felt after the fight or watching it at the time.
Yeah, not saying that it was a Strickland Adesanya style blowout. It was very much a fight, but yeah, like as brilliant as that single tactical sequence was, it was much more of a punctuation mark on a good performance by Alexa Grosso than it was a sudden windfall, you know?
So before, like, Edwards Usman 2, we had to, revisit the fact that a bunch of people have been like, had slightly reconfigured their first fight into just a domination, where Leon had just booted him out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And had actually been like, well, he'd actually won one round, and he would have won that round if he hadn't finished him. You know, it was shaping up to be more competitive than the numbers said. And yeah, so essentially this one is interesting because we've talked so much about sort of Shevchenko really being someone where the crux of her game lies in her wrestling.
Yep.
Increasingly. This was, I think, the most exposed in the two fights between her versus Maya and Andrade.
Mm-hmm.
In both cases, we're talking a physically extremely overwhelming opponent who is going to try and press that physicality in a single area. Andrade, you might have thought as being the aggressive fighter who can take her out of her game, kind of on the feet, and could just, force her into bad exchanges. Got absolutely obliterated. Maya did way better. Was able to sort of grapple and hang with her. I think that has increasingly been the sort of defining feature of Shevchenko as a champion, is that the wrestling is a safety valve. And the wrestling is her safe zone, and the thing that you sort of some ways you need to take away from her to beat her.
Yes.
And that was sort of the story of this fight, because much of it was her just like not winning on the feet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Which didn't often lead to very much damage.
Yep.
Leading to a very strange dynamic.
And I think you could definitely identify the major turning point in the fight to where it was just Grosso doing better, being when Grosso just started sniffing out and stuffing all the takedowns. The shots became sloppier. Because of her striking success, they were often initiated from the wrong distance. And because she was so aggressive and so active with her feints, which was a huge thing I remember talking about before the fight, that we wanted to see Grosso do more of. It would make her combination punching game all the more effective. But because of that, the timing was off on the takedowns, and Grosso just had the right defenses. She just started stuffing them. And that's how you beat Valentina Shevchenko, right? If you can at least compete with her on the feet and do it consistently, then stuff the takedowns. At the very least, you're going to get a close fight that either of you might win.
And I mean, and again, like, the closeness of this fight was entirely down to the fact
you're right, yeah.
Grosso conceded a ton of takedowns.
Yeah.
On the feet, she was mostly winning fairly handily. So, before we started recording, we had an interesting conversation between the two of us where I was trying to figure out what was going on with Shevchenko in this fight. And I think at least partially it's the fact that she doesn't really like... I think due to, again, in the sort of slightly Adesanya sense, she doesn't like the southpaw versus southpaw dynamic, because it gives her basically less space to operate in close stance. Her opponent's lead foot is much closer to her. I think she very much did not enjoy the moments, much of the fight that Grosso fought when she was just in southpaw. Yeah. And so I was asking, like, what happened to her right hook counter? Because this was really what ailed her out against Holly Holm. And I think you fairly accurately said that she, for both, I think, technical and probably mental reasons, just, like, couldn't throw it so much against Grosso. Yeah. That was, Holm was the last, like, really concerted southpaw she fought, right? Pretty sure. I mean, Holm is just a southpaw. And in this fight, Grosso was basically just a southpaw, even though she's not typically. And yeah, as you said, the right hook was the answer to Holly Holm. And the reason for that is that despite the fact that Holly Holm is like visibly twice Shevchenko's size in that fight, she is a fighter in a sort of Ross Pearson mold who is by far at her most effective off the back foot, but will never, ever, ever turn down an invitation to come forward and try to make something happen. And in certain matchups, Shevchenko, Jermaine Durandamy, this results in her essentially just throwing herself into the wood chipper over and over again. And for Holm in particular... It's also that she fights from a absolutely colossal range. A comical distance. Literally, as you said, I don't think you're even exaggerating that much when you say 10 feet away. She is at least a full Holly Holm away, ideally. So to close distance, she would essentially like paw the ground and then just gallop forward. And yeah... much of the time. It's tough to notice that tell, but it's when Holly snorts, she's about to punch you. So like Shevchenko, who was, much smaller, but very much faster. Yes. Was able to just pivot out of the way and just crack her. And it was actually, as you've said before, it's a really nice. It's my favorite Shevchenko performances. Yeah, it's my favorite Shevchenko performance. It's the one that feels the most like a good Rafael Sunsao fight. Where she's just getting the openings and she just has a little moment early in the fight where Holm, like, balance knocks her down, and then she just completely controls her off the back foot and just punishes every move she makes. I really like that fight from Valentina. But the thing with Holm is, it's not only the distance, like, even when she is not at the wrong distance, she is a fundamentally telegraphing fighter. I have written about this before, we've talked about it many times before.
Her mechanics are bad. She's super heavy on the front foot. She has no way to gain any space for her punches to extend into her punches other than to move her entire body forward. So it is just a built-in telegraph recipe for a quick counter right hook like the one Valentina showed in that fight. Against Grosso, the right hook is still one of Valentina's main weapons and her main defensive weapon. But she tries it the way she used it against Holly very early against Grosso, and she gets nailed. For the same reason that punch always makes me nervous, that, you know, Grosso's coming in with a left straight, and Shevchenko is trying to beat her to the punch with a hook. The compromise is that the hook starts closer to the target. The opponent has to reach across their body to land the rear straight. But it is a shot where you sort of leave yourself in a very vulnerable position. Even if you're doing a check hook where you're moving your feet and taking an angle as you throw, there is a vital moment where if you mistime it, you are right on line for the more direct shot, the straight that's coming at you. It's
to some extent what happened to Izzy.
Yeah. It's absolutely what happened to Izzy in the knockdown in round 1, yes. It takes a ton of precision to pull that off. And the other example is that always leaps to mind is Hakeem Dawodu.
Yes.
Got brutally punished by who was that? Was it Jamie Malarkey? No, it was the South African guy.
I can't even remember at this point. But anyway, yeah, he tries to land that counter punch and then immediately just gets dusted.
Yeah, in like his second UFC fight, it was before getting adjusted or anything, he just immediately tried to clip the guy. It was Danny Henry. Tried to clip him with a check hook right away and got beamed. So this happened to Valentina, and for the rest of the fight, she really only throws the right hook deeper into exchanges. She does not try to use it as that like initial clipping you on the way in, same time counter the way she caught Holly Holm again and again. Instead, she tries to meet Grosso with the jab and then take a step back and follow with the right hook on a little angle. But that is a huge part of how her counter game works, is beating you in that first initial moment. She's a big same time counter puncher. If you pull her into longer exchanges, does Valentina have like a ton of head movement? Does she have a super active, attentive defense? She is mostly beating people on the counter in that initial layer. She is meeting them like a karate style counter puncher. Collision. So yeah, it just suddenly became a kind of counter punching performance where she was just way less equipped to actually, to consistently win these longer, more drawn-out exchanges.
It was just like this stark difference between, someone who was able to essentially, do what Holly Holm was trying to do, just throw long southpaw 1-2s from the outside. Mm-hmm. But it was simply the fact that that Grosso is a better puncher, and that she's faster and she did it from less far away. And that it immediately, and I think simply that, Shevchenko has also become more risk-averse as a champion, as people do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, once she realized what the risk of that punch was, she kind of largely shelved it. And yeah, as without same-time counters, again, like it really just comes down to that wrestling. And that was the story of the fight. It was just Grosso landing 1-2s, and then Shevchenko picking up wrestling exchanges. And
mm-hmm.
I can't even remember whether I thought Shevchenko was winning by the time the fight was won, but it was quite competitive, and it was quite competitive in a very binary way.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's not 100% black and white. Like, I do think there are some things Shevchenko could try to expand on. When she started finding her jab, she landed it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
She has a good, quick jab. She just often doesn't need it because her footwork is enough to maintain the distance against the vast majority of her opponents. And the vast majority of them will try to crash in across that distance with something big and stupid that she can counter with that right hook. But once she realized she was just going to have to sort of keep Grosso at bay with the jab, she was fairly good at it.
I agree.
So, I don't, it wasn't like watching a Strickland Adesanya kind of thing.
Oh, no,
it was a big upset, but there is no feeling that Shevchenko couldn't possibly win this rematch. Not at all. Grosso still has her own issues with, she can still be a bit clunky. Connecting her footwork to her combinations, like as a come forward puncher, I think this was probably her best performance in that regard, but she can still get a little predictable rhythmically. You start to get a pretty clear idea of, oh, it's a 1-2-3 again, and oh, it's coming on exactly this sort of tempo. And yeah, Shevchenko was making striking adjustments, and she did hit a ton of clean takedowns early in the fight. She just, and until Grosso started to sniff out the entries, her actual wrestling technique was really not good. Her defensive wrestling was not really up to snuff. When she started beating the takedowns,
that was broadly why we confidently picked Shevchenko, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like, she's going to get taken down a ton. And
yeah.
That was very true.
Yeah, she did. And all I'm saying is that her, it was her ability to see the takedown coming that allowed her to start avoiding more of them. It was not the fact that Shevchenko gets in and then she out-wrestled her. She's not Jose Aldo, out there beating Chad Mendes in straight-up wrestling sequences. She doesn't have that ability. So, I don't know. I don't really have a super strong feeling. I don't know. I guess the only rematch I've seen Shevchenko in after a fight she lost was not a promising performance.
Oh, you mean
Nunes.
Against Nunes, yeah.
That's the only time I've seen her rematch somebody who's beaten her. And she did not come into that fight looking like, oh, I know what I have to do to win. She, in fact...
particularly given the fact that she easily won the third round of their...
Exactly.
Of their first fight. You didn't fight, it wasn't like, I'm going to pick up where I left off.
Yeah.
Continue beating your ass.
Yeah. And to be fair to her, first one was a 3-rounder, second one was a 5-rounder, and basically what happened in their first fight was Nunes destroyed herself. Because she was just as easily as Valentina beat her in the third round, Nunes was beating Shevchenko that easily early. So
she absolutely thrashed her.
Yeah. So really just maybe Shevchenko came in and was like, I'm going to be ready to take whatever licking I got to take, and then I'm going to be there and have more time to put her away. But Nunes just didn't fight in a way that allowed her to gas, and Shevchenko was not proactive at all in trying to make that happen.
Yeah. The real all-time stinker.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the other thing I find myself thinking is that obviously, I think Shevchenko is obviously a fairly well-prepared, disciplined fighter.
Mm-hmm.
They might have just been surprised by the fact that Grosso fought the whole fight southpaw.
Sure.
Might have just been one of those times they'd just trained a whole bunch of sparring with like orthodox partners and all that kind of stuff, and Grosso just came out and, as in another famous women's MMA fight in recent memory, just shocked her by being southpaw the whole time. She might come out this time. She's trained with a bunch of southpaws, and just looks better ready to land her counters.
I thought you were going to say Grosso was going to
on the feet.
I thought you were going to say then Grosso would just do the opposite. No, I think...
I would. Grosso just comes out and just resolutely orthodox for the entire fight.
Now, obviously, what Valentina should do is she should come out and be orthodox the whole fight.
Yeah.
Somebody surprises you with a stance-specific problem, change your entire game, and be a good enough athlete to somehow make that work.
You are onto something.
I don't think that's going to happen. Shevchenko is not a very changeable stylist in the cage. For her entire MMA career, she has been out there doing broadly the same exact shit against everybody. And she's always southpaw, so no fear of her trying to suddenly transform her entire game in that dramatically. I don't know. I don't really have a strong feeling here. I feel like if Shevchenko were to pick up on, I have to like take side steps and jabs and try to shut her out early, I think she could pick up more time on the feet. She could pick up rounds on the feet too. Because it's not like
done that.
Huh?
She ever done that?
No, but I've never seen her do it the way she did it in rounds 3 and 4 against Grosso either. And as I said, it was quite effective. She did thwart a lot of Grosso's pressure just by stinging her with the jab. Pivot, jab, pivot, jab. I mean, if there's anything to take away from that fight, that was a very effective way to thwart a lot of Grosso's pressure and volume.
Yeah. I find myself thinking, with Beijing champions, particularly ones who are in fact, naturally very conservative.
Yeah.
I find it, I can't make myself pick them to have to come out with more assertive game plans.
What does it have to be?
It's just very,
doesn't even have to be particularly assertive. It just has to be the right kind of reactive. You're walking onto me, I'm sticking you with this. It's an adjustment small enough that I could see Valentina making it. It's a smaller adjustment than the one Izzy got himself to make in the rematch with Pereira. And
it's a lot smaller than what Leon did against Usman.
Yeah. It's not, like, I think just the earlier presence of that weapon would make a lot of difference in her being able to navigate this fight and create better entries for her takedowns off of that jab to just sort of keep Grosso from overwhelming her. It should be a relatively small thing. And Izzy versus Pereira the second time around is definitely a good example of a historically conservative champion being really pissed off that they lost and coming in really focused to do something even just slightly out of character to get it back. I mean, Shevchenko is a very competitive person. She's, I'm sure, extremely proud of having held this title for a very long time. I would expect her to come in basically more motivated than she's ever been.
I think that's true. I just don't trust her to make any changes.
Yeah. Could be.
Bunch of reasons, yeah. Aging out, just getting more. You get more conservative over time. As you said, her one rematch was one of the stinkiest, staring matches that we had ever watched until Rosa Spar's do. Ironically, Nunes would go on to have an incredibly successful championship career until the point where she just got smoked by a southpaw who ran up to her and just started jabbing her a bunch.
Not a southpaw. It was Nunes went southpaw to stop an orthodox fighter.
Yeah, sorry, she went southpaw to stop the dip jab. Yes, no, sorry,
But you're right. Somebody who could pressure her and just stay in her grill and yeah.
Yeah, and just slip jabs and come in and jab with her. And so it's one of those things where, sure, Shevchenko can jab for short amounts of time. And, but she will just naturally slip back into what she wants to do.
It's true. It is
over
very
the vast majority of the time. And again, I find her more likely to do that even than pretty much anyone else we've been talking about. Israel Adesanya was a very aggressive fighter at one point.
That's true, yeah.
It's in him.
Few fighters are as rigidly conservative as Valentina has been throughout her combat sports career. Not just MMA.
For me, I think the basic questions are, can Grosso learn to stop a takedown? Which is a genuinely open question.
Yes.
And also, can Shevchenko keep her down enough to just keep winning rounds?
Yeah.
I mean, both of which is more than fair to assume that, both of those things are actually still true. Because Grosso's takedown defense, as you said, didn't look good.
No.
And we had no reason to assume that it would look good either.
Yeah.
It hadn't been one of those things where we'd seen it slowly getting better over time. No. It's always been dog water. It was still dog water in that fight. I am going to pick Grosso, just due to the way the two trended. It's one of those ones where, I just think Valentina has to have so much control in the fight. Anything she said after the fight just made me think she actually thought she fought really well. Didn't actually have real strategic sweeping changes to make. Hopefully her team tells her.
Yeah, and
but
she said all that. I'm not even sure she'd rewatched the fight at that point.
Yeah.
So who knows what her actual perspective is on it, given a little time. I don't know. I do feel like, as much as I'm happy to push back against the sudden win, I don't know that Grosso would have won a decision in this fight. I'm not sure she was.
She wouldn't have. She wouldn't have done.
Yeah, and I'm not sure she was winning the fourth round itself up to that moment, really. She did good in the third. She started stuffing more of the takedowns, and that's when it felt like the momentum was shifting. And then Valentina settled on jabbing her on the way in. And I have to check the stats. I'm pretty sure she outlanded her in that fourth round. Let's see what the stats say. Out of curiosity. Round 4, 22-13 for Shevchenko. 55% accuracy. 27-15, and even in round 3. Once she found that jab, I don't know. I'm going to, just to keep the fans on their toes, I'm going to have a strange vote of confidence for Shevchenko's ability to just do the things that already worked earlier and to not get caught by a chance submission, and for that to be enough. I'm not expecting any kind of radically more aggressive approach or anything. Just a couple, very manageable technical tweaks. A couple things you can just change in the drilling for preparation. I will expect her to have had a bunch of southpaw sparring partners and to therefore put herself in a position where she doesn't need a takedown every round necessarily to win the fight. With the understanding that she probably will certainly still get some of those takedowns. Because Grosso's wrestling is bad. So I'm going to take Shevchenko. I think she gets it back. I know she's getting old. Surely the end of the line is coming for her, but I don't think it was all that reproducible a performance from Grosso. As impressive as it was, again, it was no Strickland Adesanya. It was still a very competitive fight.
Yeah, it's more than fair. I think I'm still just going to pick Grosso just because of the way these fights tend to trend. Apart from anything else, the younger fighter often tends to come in brimming with confidence the next time round.
As she should.
And I just don't trust Val to make adjustments. It would be kind of cool to see her do it, though. I would like to see her.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Resurrecting her right hand and having like a cool jab-heavy performance.
Yeah, at this point,
it'd be cool to see Grosso suddenly develop takedown defense.
That would be cool too.
I find that even less likely. That's simply something that we've never seen.
Yeah. Yeah, at this point I've spent so much time hating Shevchenko that I have developed in the sort of mode of a tumor, I have developed a begrudging respect for her. And so now I'm like, you know what, Val? You can do it. Go out there and bore the world to tears one last time.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a break then. When we come back, we've got Kevin Holland versus Jack Della Maddalena, and then perhaps a little bit on Cop dos Santos as well from last weekend after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Jack Della Maddalena exposed, taking on Kevin Holland. I can't recall if we were recording or not when I said this to you earlier, Phil, but This is a fight I do not think I would have had any difficulty picking. Prior to either of these last man's most recent fights. Because Kevin Holland has once again reminded us that he can box a little bit. And we learned about Jack Della Maddalena that maybe he can't actually box that well. The main thing everyone took away from his fight with guy whose name I've already forgotten, who was very impressive. What was that guy's name? Basil Hafez.
Oh, yes.
The main thing everyone took away from that was like, oh, Jack Della Maddalena is making terrible grappling decisions, which he was. He was getting taken down, and he kept engaging in the grappling of his own accord. I think that was symptomatic of the fact that he was also having difficulty on the feet. He was in there against an opponent who punched with him and who fired straight shots down the middle, and Maddalena could not simply build an attack patiently. He did not have what, say, Ilia Topuria has. I'm sure the, short notice thing, the takedown threat, all of these things, he was probably just discombobulated, and his decision making cannot be taken as if it happened in a vacuum. Still, it does make me think there is a version of this fight where Kevin Holland actually frustrates a lot of Jack Della Maddalena's aggressive boxing game.
So, you said that Kevin Holland has reminded us that he can box. Ow.
A bit. A bit.
Are we talking against Michael Chiesa?
He looked a little better against Ponzinibbio.
Mm-hmm.
He still doing big stupid donkey punches. I know that's not what that word means, but it felt appropriate. But he was at his most stupid against Stephen Thompson. And I think he took a cue from that loss and dialed it back a bit. Kevin Holland does have a jab. Kevin Holland can move his feet. He does have something resembling punch defense. Those things were apparent in that fight as much as he also really just won it by just being welterweight Kevin Holland and just donking Ponzinibbio over the head. Yeah. But it's still not.
I thought
it's not what we saw from him against Joaquin Buckley. I don't think we're ever seeing that Kevin Holland again, sadly. You were saying.
I thought against Chiesa he did actually look about as good as we've seen him at welterweight, with the obvious caveat that this is against the striking of Michael Chiesa.
Yeah. And a Chiesa who also was probably quite rusty, having not fought in, I think it was 2 years almost, a year and a half at least, between his loss to Sean Brady. This is the third fight in a losing streak. And Chiesa has just been less focused on fighting. I think that was a bit of an element too. But Kevin, even in the striking portions of that fight, Kevin was a lot more considered. He was sending his ridiculous power punches largely to the body, which was nice. He kept Chiesa on the end of his jab. If I see Kevin Holland jabbing and trying to control his opponent with that range weapon, I get a good feeling. That's what I want to see him do.
Fight was it when he broke his right hand and immediately became a better fighter?
What was that?
I think he was still at middleweight, right? It was was it? Alex Oliveira or something. But yeah, there was definitely one where he, I think John Phillips, but yeah, there was definitely one where he hurt his right hand and then was just, immediately became way better.
Yeah, it was probably Phillips.
But yeah, I find it challenging to look at him and be because I think Chiesa fight is his best welterweight performance. I mean, he was so bad against Thompson. I'm just looking at it again, and just the giant windmill swings that he was throwing at Stephen Thompson, no less.
Idiotic.
He still kind of stayed in the fight a bit because like Stephen Thompson's just kind of a physical spent force, and like Holland, when he got his hands on him, could just like shove him bodily across the cage, or like grab a single collar tie. It's a very. So, I mean, how do you think this fight goes? Because I honestly have no idea.
I mean, my baseline assumption is still that Jack Della Maddalena, again, I think a lot of what happened against Basil Hafez was reacting to him having no idea what to expect from his opponent. Mm-hmm. The fight starts and Hafez completes a takedown. So, and there's the first of the bad decisions when Della Maddalena goes for the guillotine. I mean, he was in Poirier mode majorly in this fight, but you could even see why he went for it. I mean, the opening was there. He actually locked it up. He just couldn't finish it. And this is like the first thing that happened in the fight. And I think he spends a lot of the rest of the time sort of reacting to that and trying to adjust. I also think he, he's just very used to just breaking people. So as soon as he started getting Hafez into some wild exchanges, he just couldn't stop himself. But the baseline of that matchup was that Della Maddalena fights somebody nobody knows, and he walks them down and beats them up. And then everything went wrong and was surprising, and it led to him making bad decisions everywhere. Even though his corner was pleading with him to use his jab and to actually control the distance and to draw out some of these, frankly hideous counterpunches from Hafez and then punish them, it was all in adjustment mode. And perhaps what we learned more than anything is that Jack Della Maddalena is not a good adjuster when something happens in the fight that he could not expect. He could not prepare for. Mm-hmm. And there was no reason to expect him to be prepared for it because it was a short notice replacement.
I think his main thing is that he drives people into decisions which he then adjusts to.
Yeah.
And he is the one who is being driven into having to make decisions.
Right.
He starts doing silly things.
Yeah. But, I don't see why that means he can't beat Kevin Holland. I mean, first of all, Kevin Holland is not going to have any kind of credible wrestling or grappling threat. He might go for it, but he's not a particularly good takedown artist. And Della Maddalena did not show poor takedown defense, really. If anything, it was the fact that he worsened his position deep into takedown battle sequences that led to the moments where he was really being controlled on the ground. He was stuffing most of the takedowns outright after that first one. And then otherwise, even if Kevin Holland is in jab mode, Kevin Holland is not a consistent fighter. He just isn't. Even in his best performances where he's in slick counterpuncher, long range boxing mode, people tend to have a good third round against him, like Darren Stewart did. Or, Yep. I just think pretty much Maddalena's usual pressure game is going to draw bigger and bigger reactions out of Kevin. He's going to get the openings he's looking for, and he's not going to have anything unexpected to try to reconfigure his game around. So maybe he was exposed. Maybe I think Kevin has an opportunity to fight as his best self and really make it difficult for Maddalena to get into the pocket, but I don't trust Kevin, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could be headed for a real kind of fight of two halves, kind of.
Sure.
Thing. Particularly like that Della Maddalena fight against Randy Brown.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, people are like, oh, look, it's a methodical pressure performance when he's like pushed him back to the cage and eventually finished him off kind of thing. And he did it really quickly and very impressed and so on. And I just didn't feel that way about that fight.
No.
Just like he managed to get one exchange against the fence and it managed to finish off Randy Brown because he's Randy Brown.
Yeah, I mean, that's the rare fight that I called absolutely to a T, which is that as long as Randy Brown is fighting smart, he's probably going to be beating Jack Della Maddalena. Which he was. And then at some point he's going to run into a corner and get smoked, which he did.
Yeah. That it was like, I thought he was fighting better than I thought he could up till that point. And then, but the corner was so instantly destructive.
Yeah.
Like, that it was like a parody of how this matchup should go out.
Yeah, yes, too perfect.
And yeah, so I do kind of feel like there's going to be, if this happens along those same lines, like, there's a good chance like Holland will be chewing him up early. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, as you said, I think the real key for me is, I wasn't thinking of it, is that third round. It's like, Kevin just cannot, he's not a super high-paced fighter, but he just can't maintain.
Physically or mentally, I think that's part of it too. He just doesn't have the focus to just sit on a couple of effective tools and focus on like, oh, as long as I stay at my distance, I can just take the targets that are available. He will also, less suicidally than Randy Brown, I expect. Holland's very tough, but he will also get driven into the corner and pressed up against the cage eventually. He will, at some point, I expect his jab to just kind of, whether it's because it gets countered or because he gets bored of it. I mean, that happens in Kevin's fights. He just gets bored of doing the same thing. You know, the best example is his fight with Joaquin Buckley. And if he could deliver a performance like that, where he doesn't get bored of hitting him because he keeps being given these big charging openings, but that implies that Della Maddalena has zero ability whatsoever to do better than he did against Basil Hafez. And I don't think that's the case. I think a better prepared Della Maddalena at least uses his jabs and his feints to close the distance. He doesn't just try to initiate every 5-punch combination from long range and get chewed up on the counter. So I'm taking Jack.
It's easy to see Kevin winning the first round. It's very hard to not see him getting buzzsawed in round 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that's more or less how I feel.
So yeah, I'm also taking Jack with some trepidation.
Yeah.
But unless, he's got something like he's got some real bad chin deficiencies, he should be able to win this one with some scares.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think he does. We've seen him take plenty of clean shots. I think he's quite durable. I think he really trusts in it. It's what gives him confidence to fight the way he does.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, he fights like that because he knows he can.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, look at his nose. The man's been hit. All right. Well, then let's say a few words about the other highlight of UFC 293. The number of gay slurs utilized in post-fight. Oh, wait, no, sorry. The thing before that. Manel Cop, Felipe Dos Santos.
I don't like Manel Cop.
You don't like him?
Oh. I don't know whether it's because of, like, how, what's the right word? Like, how aggressive he is about all his, like, being the biggest badass in the world kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, like, he doesn't generally have super action-packed fights given on his own terms. Like, he's this incredibly, like, loud-mouthed guy. And then I watch him fight and I'm like, I've seen Tyson Nam and John Dodson fight. Need a halfway house between the two.
Yeah.
That being said, I thought this was a good performance from him.
It was awesome.
I think he is a genuinely talented. He is a genuinely talented fighter.
Oh, no question.
Some of that confidence comes from. This was like whether because it had to be, because of who he was fighting, a much more active counterpunching performance than he's shown against some of the people who have beaten him in the UFC.
I think that definitely was part of it. Like John Dodson, right? You give John Dodson John Lineker, he's the most exciting fighter in the world. What a great fight that was, because he had no choice. He just had to keep fighting him to keep him from, doing horrible things to his inert body. Yeah, I find Manel Kape a little off-putting as a guy. But I always enjoy watching his fights. Even when they're frustrating, you are going to see at least one extremely cool thing.
Very true.
Kape is a super relaxed, smooth, he is a natural, organic striker. Which is why I think for much of the early part of his career, he sort of defined I defined him as the guy whose style I couldn't quite describe. Is this the way he fights? Is this what he likes? He is very much an innovator in your parlance, who I think, if anything, trends towards counterpunching. And, Felipe Dos Santos just gave him tons of opportunities, and more than that, an incentive to counter, because otherwise Dos Santos was going to be all over him. And as a result, we saw even more very cool things than we usually see in Manel Kape fights. We saw, I think, some pretty impressive defense and cagecraft, good evasive footwork, and when the counters came, they usually came in blistering combinations. And we saw Manel Kape also, to thwart the pressure, we saw Manel Kape using his jab more than I think we've seen him in a lot of his performances. He had to. So, yeah.
That is the frustrating thing, is that he can look extremely good sometimes.
Yeah.
And then, in even this fight, was awesome. But by the end of it, he was just like, no more of this.
Exactly.
That's as much as I've had. And, towards the end of the third round, he was mostly just he just mostly just ran away and then landed one takedown.
Yeah.
Dos Santos. I mean, Dos Santos is tremendously fun. This guy, as long as his chin holds up, which God knows, will it?
Yeah.
I don't know. He's just people have obviously compared him to Charles Oliveira, but he's like Charles Oliveira now in the body of a 23-year-old.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Charles Oliveira had to painstakingly learn how to be like this.
Yes.
Santos is just like this.
Yeah, it does seem like Oliveira has, because they're teammates, right?
Yeah.
It does seem like Oliveira's style has had a sort of gravitational pull on the styles of the developing fighters around him. There is a lot of young guys in that camp who are all trying to be little Chucky Oliveses. And, it's a lot of fun. I was not actually that impressed with Dos Santos looking at the tape beforehand, mostly because I was like, well, he's just going to blunder in face first every time he punches. And it happened, and Manel Kape landed some devastating counters, beautiful. I particularly liked the right uppercut counter, that came after.
He's got a lot of different blends of right hand counter he throws, from uppercut to shovel hook to just this little short right hand.
Yeah.
Short right straight.
Even a couple of little shoulder roll right hand counters from Manel Kape in this fight. But he is still frustrating. That's just who he is. I think he is fundamentally a counterpuncher and not necessarily in a little more of an Adesanya kind of way. Where it's not necessarily that he's eager for you to come in so he can counter you. He sort of expects that at some point the counters are going to change your mind about wanting to continue to press him. And if they don't, then you see him going quite passive. It helps that he's, even compared to Adesanya, very, very fast, even among flyweights. So he can stay away pretty effectively unless you are actually a good striker, which, fun as he is, Felipe Dos Santos isn't really an actually good striker.
No. Might be.
He could develop into one for sure.
He's basically got chin and strike selection and
Yep.
raw aggression, and a couple of like tricks linked to that.
Yep.
I mean, you know, in many ways, like Charles Oliveira is actually like a very good striker, but he's like an immensely good puncher and kicker.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like some of the things. One of the things I liked about Dos Santos that kept, I think, throwing Cup off is his ability to like throw hard counters after he's thrown his own kick. But yeah, like a Cup would like catch or check a kick, or would just eat a kick and would be ready to like counter afterwards. But Dos Santos is already like sitting down on a hard counter afterwards as he puts his foot down. Again, like all of this is just mostly tied together with just raw aggression. But
Yes.
again, it took Chucky Olives to a title. He doesn't need that much, you know, just improvements on his mechanics so that, because he hit Cup clean a bunch of times even before he tied him out in the third round.
And he was
just driving him backwards.
He was broadly losing a lot of the longer exchanges too after Kopp had started countering a combination, but he was still hitting him in the midst of those exchanges too. And yeah, I gotta say, if you are sort of a still raw but perfectly comfortable being aggressive young fighter, if you are all too happy to just extend every exchange you find yourself in, and that's what lets you beat people, then probably Manel Kopp is the toughest fight in the division. Right? Like, not a lot of other people can put on this kind of counterpunching performance from Kopp. He did, again, like dozens of extremely cool things off the back foot in this fight that most people just can't.
He's a very hard puncher. There was no reason to assume that Santos was going to be able to take these punches.
I don't know how he did, which is another thing he has, a leg up on Chucky Olives. He appears to have a chin. He got knocked down, but not as easily as Charles usually gets knocked down, nor as quickly. So yeah, really fun fight.
This was really cool from both guys. Even if Cup, not have the greatest post-fight interview.
No. Although it certainly doesn't make me want to see his matchup with Kai Kara-France less. I mean, the other thing, Kopp was annoying about that beforehand because he was like, the reason he's so pissed at Kai Kara-France, he's like, oh, you're scared of me. Kai got a concussion in training camp. And was like, oh, I'm not medically fit to fight. And Kopp's take on that was like, you're a pussy, you should fight with concussions, whatever. I'm like,
yeah, he seems like a huge dickhead.
Yes. That is such an aggro, macho mentality to have. I'm glad Kai Kara-France withdrew to let himself recover. Then again...
It's not even just like a macho mentality, it's like an other people don't exist kind of thing.
Sociopathic, like, you might say.
It's more like I didn't get my fight, and instead I ended up getting like bossed around the third round by a nobody, and I feel angry at this, and because I'm a child, I'm going to take it out on you, Kai Kara-France.
Yeah, a little more narcissistic even perhaps than your average MMA fighter. But I do want to see him fight Kai Kara-France. It hasn't diminished my interest. Quite the opposite.
If nothing else, I was like, man, Cup can genuinely have bangers, admittedly, against someone who looks like an incredible action fighter in the future. But, this was easily his most exciting performance that he's had in the UFC, including any of his wins.
Yes. And the time is now to get Manel Kopp as a supremely talented fighter. The time is now to see him taking on the best in the division. All right. Well, that will do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. A very long episode, but as last week, Israel Adesanya is just such a fascinating like case study of fighter mentality and the sort of the ins and outs, both the pathologies and techniques that certain like fighting styles are built of. And as was the case last week, we spent like 50 minutes just talking about Izzy and how he lost to Sean Strickland. Hey, we said it. We don't know if it's going to be a good fight or not, but we know it'll be interesting enough to talk about. It was both a good fight and very interesting to talk about. That'll do it. Otherwise, you should find us on Twitter.com at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. I will remind you once again to go check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. You will find there a bonus episode in which Phil and I just sort of discussed the relentlessness of the UFC schedule, weight cutting, fight cancellations, and various financial incentives, and basically tried to come up with a theory as to why UFC cards suck so much more than they used to. Whether we're just being old men who remember the good old days, or whether that's actually happening. Spoilers, it's actually happening, is our conclusion. But you can find that in the Patreon. You will also find from last week, I think, a boxing commentary I did, Juan Manuel Marquez versus Juan Diaz. One of my favorite fights, pressure fighter versus counterpuncher. You know it's going to be good. And, yeah, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening.
Oh, and also, make sure, if it wasn't plugged enough in the episode, make sure everyone to check out Connor's, Bangers and Bummers piece on Izzy.
Bangers and Bummers, the two sides of Israel Adesanya. Yes.
Which holds up very, very well.
It aged
in light of his fight with Strickland.
Aged better than I could have possibly imagined. Now, if only, Phil, I could learn the trick of somehow leveraging these wonderful insights into actually picking fights correctly. That would be amazing. But as usual, I will satisfy myself with sort of getting the picture without really understanding what it meant. Okay, well, we'll be back next week to talk to you about Grosso Shevchenko. Fiziev versus Gamrot is the card after that. Also has Bryce Mitchell, Dan Ige, so we will definitely have some good fights. Well, I say definitely. Listen to our bonus episode first and then decide for yourself. We will likely have some good fights to talk to you about next week. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of Face Punch and you came to the right place, this has been Heavy Hands.